When was the last time you ever did some childish stuff with your grandbaby? And me, it's almost every day. I'm in a hotel. I'm teaching her the great thing about
A suspect has been arrested in the murder of a Southfield woman, and the person charged is the victim's own daughter. CBS News Detroit's Veronica Ortega has the latest on the investigation, including body camera and surveillance video.
Surveillance video shows a dark-colored car pull up to a house on Bainbridge Drive in Southfield.
This murder was premeditated.
A person gets out of the car and walks inside. But minutes later, the suspect Southfield police have identified as Riley Donaldson exits the home.
Enter the front driver's seat of the Chrysler 300 and quickly speed away from the crime scene.
A mother tucks her 3-year-old granddaughter into bed on what seems like any other Sunday night in October. 45 minutes later, that same child is found standing over her grandmother's bullet-riddled body, asking why grandma won't wake up. The killer? The child's own mother, who had just driven 4 hours with a loaded gun to execute the one person keeping her daughter safe. But here's the part that will haunt you. When police arrested 22-year-old Riley Donaldson the next day, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She didn't ask about her daughter. Instead, when officers asked for her name, she smiled and said, God. Because in Riley's twisted mind, she had just exercised divine judgment. She had decided her mother needed to die. The surveillance footage tells a story so cold it's almost impossible to believe. A black Chrysler 300 creeps into the driveway at 11:40 p.m. on October 5th, 2025. Riley steps out, walks calmly to her mother's front door, and disappears inside. 3 minutes and 14 seconds later, she emerges and speeds away, leaving behind a crime scene so brutal that first responders couldn't save Ada Mae Simmons Jones despite desperate attempts. What Riley also left behind was her purse, containing her ID and the evidence that would destroy her alibi within hours. But more importantly, she left behind the 3-year-old daughter she claimed to love so much, the same child she supposedly killed for. If this was really about getting her daughter back, why did she abandon her at the scene of her grandmother's murder? The answer reveals something far more disturbing than a custody dispute gone wrong. Ada Mae had given Riley everything most struggling mothers dream of: unlimited access to her child, a stable home, financial support, and love. Riley could see her daughter whenever she wanted, stay as long as she liked, and Ada Mae never said no. Most grandmothers would have cut off contact after what Riley had already put the family through. Instead, Ada Mae kept her door open, kept her heart open, and paid for that kindness with her life. Because Riley didn't want shared custody or visitation rights. She wanted absolute power. And when you believe you're God, anyone who challenges that power becomes your enemy, even if it's the mother who gave you life. Ada Mae Simmons Jones looked like she had it all figured out. Successful realtor, beautiful home in Southfield, Michigan, and social media filled with pictures of her beaming with her granddaughter. To anyone scrolling through her posts, Ada Mae was living the dream of the devoted grandmother, teaching little Price to dance, taking her to hotels for fun adventures, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. But behind every smiling photo was a woman carrying an impossible burden. What most people didn't know was that Ada Mae was fighting a war she never wanted to be part of. The state had removed Riley's daughter from her care, and Ada Mae faced a choice that would destroy any mother's heart. She could let her granddaughter disappear into the foster care system, or she could step in and become the legal guardian. Ada Mae chose love over peace, and that decision would eventually cost her everything. The custody battle wasn't just about paperwork and court dates. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for months. Riley had a history of taking the child without permission, making threats, and putting her daughter in potentially dangerous situations. There were incidents that never made it into police reports because Ada Mae kept hoping her daughter would change. She kept believing that love and patience could fix what was clearly broken. Friends later revealed that Ada Mae had been receiving disturbing messages from Riley for weeks before the murder. Riley accused her mother of stealing her child, of ruining her life, of being the enemy. But Ada Mae never restricted Riley's access to her daughter. She never said Riley couldn't visit or spend time with the little girl. In fact, she encouraged it, hoping that consistent contact would help Riley become the mother her daughter deserved. The social media posts everyone saw showed a happy grandmother and granddaughter. What they didn't show were the sleepless nights Ada Mae spent worrying about Riley's mental state. The conversations where Ada Mae tried to convince Riley to get help. The moments when Ada Mae wondered if she was doing the right thing by keeping the family together. She was trying to save two people, her granddaughter from an unstable environment and her daughter from herself. But Ada Mae made one critical error in judgment that would prove fatal. After Riley kidnapped her granddaughter and stole her car in August 2025, driving the child to Ohio without permission, Ada Mae chose not to press charges. Instead, she petitioned for Riley to receive mental health treatment. She believed her daughter needed help, not jail time. That act of mercy gave Riley the freedom to plan her revenge. Even in her final weeks, Ada Mae was still trying to protect everyone. She was still answering Riley's calls, still allowing visits, still hoping that somehow this nightmare would end with her family intact. She had no idea that Riley was already planning her execution, buying a car specifically for the murder, and choosing the date when she would become an orphan's only surviving parent. Riley Donaldson's transformation from struggling young mother to cold-blooded killer didn't happen overnight. It began in the digital world, where she carefully crafted a narrative that painted her as the victim of everyone else's cruelty. Her social media became a public diary of rage, and anyone paying attention could have seen the warning signs written in every post. In May 2025, she wrote something that should have terrified anyone who read it. "My mom says she's worried, but I'm covered in his favor." The reference to divine protection wasn't random. Riley was already developing the delusion that would later make her tell police she was God. But her online persona revealed something even more disturbing than religious mania. It showed a woman who believed the entire world was conspiring against her, and that her mother was leading that conspiracy. In June, Riley posted a direct challenge to anyone questioning her parenting. "Do you all want my mom's number so you can ask her personally if I ever cared?" This wasn't just teenage rebellion or postpartum depression. This was a deliberate campaign to justify what she was already considering. Riley was building a public case for why her mother deserved punishment. Every post, every accusation, every claim of being misunderstood was laying the groundwork for murder. She was creating a narrative where killing Ada Mae would seem like justice instead of matricide. The relationship with her baby's father, Darnell Adams, became the catalyst that pushed Riley over the edge. Their toxic dynamic played out on social media like a soap opera, but buried in those public fights were Riley's growing complaints about her mother's role in her life. In July, she wrote a long post accusing Darnell of assault, but the most revealing part wasn't about him. It was about Ada Mae. "The only reason he isn't in jail is because of my mother and Price. I've protected people who wouldn't even flinch if it was me." Riley had convinced herself that Ada Mae was actively working against her, preventing her from getting justice, and choosing her granddaughter over her own daughter. The reality was that Ada Mae was trying to keep the family stable, while Riley's relationship drama threatened to destroy everyone around her. But in Riley's mind, her mother had become the source of all her problems. The August kidnapping incident was Riley's first attempt to take complete control. When she drove to Ohio with her daughter and Ada Mae's car, she wasn't just acting impulsively. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before someone stopped her. When Ada Mae chose mental health treatment over criminal charges, Riley didn't see mercy. She saw weakness. She interpreted her mother's love as proof that she could get away with anything. That's when Riley started planning the murder. Friends later told investigators that Riley had been talking about getting her daughter back for weeks, but she never mentioned custody lawyers or family court. She talked about taking action, about showing everyone who was really in charge. She started researching cars, looking for something that couldn't be traced back to her regular vehicle. On October 5th, she found what she was looking for, a 2017 Chrysler 300 that would become her getaway car and her biggest mistake. The final piece of Riley's psychological puzzle was her belief that killing Ada May would automatically give her custody of her daughter. She didn't understand that murder doesn't solve custody disputes. She thought that eliminating her mother would eliminate the problem, leaving her as the only parent standing. What she didn't realize was that she was about to make her daughter an orphan with a mother in prison for life. The drive from Cincinnati to Southfield takes exactly 3 hours and 57 minutes. Riley had 4 hours to change her mind, 4 hours to turn around, 4 hours to choose a different path. Instead, she used that time to rehearse murder. She knew exactly where Ada May would be on a Sunday night. She knew the elderly mother-in-law would be home. She knew her 3-year-old daughter would be sleeping in the back bedroom, and she drove toward them anyway. At 11:36 p.m., surveillance cameras caught the black Chrysler 300 making its first pass down Bainbridge Drive. Riley was scouting, making sure the coast was clear, timing her approach. She circled the block twice before finally pulling into Ada May's driveway at 11:39 p.m. The motion sensor floodlight immediately illuminated her vehicle, capturing her image as she stepped out wearing a dark bonnet that would later help police identify her. What happened next was caught on multiple neighborhood cameras, creating a timeline so precise that investigators could track Riley's movements down to the second. She walked directly to the front door, carrying her purse, the same purse where she'd concealed the murder weapon. Ada May opened the door immediately, which tells us something crucial. She wasn't afraid of her daughter. Even after everything that had happened, Ada May still trusted Riley enough to let her into her home at midnight. The 77-year-old mother-in-law was in her bedroom when she heard voices in the living room. At first, it sounded like a normal conversation between mother and daughter. Then the tone changed. The voices got louder. Someone was arguing, then someone was shouting. At 11:42 p.m., 3 sharp cracks echoed through the house. Then a fourth. The elderly woman knew immediately what those sounds meant, but she was physically unable to get to the living room fast enough to help. What she heard next still haunts the investigation. Footsteps running toward the front door. The sound of someone fleeing. Then absolute silence. No crying, no calls for help. No sounds of someone trying to save Ada May's life. Just the terrible quiet of a house where everything had changed in less than 3 minutes. The little girl sleeping in the back bedroom didn't wake up during the shooting, but she would wake up later to find her world completely destroyed. Riley's escape was captured in devastating detail. The surveillance footage shows her running from a house, jumping into the Chrysler, and backing out of the driveway so fast that she nearly drove into a drainage ditch. Her panic was obvious, but it wasn't the panic of someone who had acted in self-defense or made a terrible mistake. It was the panic of someone who knew they had just committed first-degree murder and needed to execute an escape plan. The purse she left behind contained everything investigators needed to identify her within minutes of arriving at the scene. Her driver's license, credit cards, and personal items created an evidence trail that made this case impossible to deny. But more importantly, that purse contained residue from the murder weapon, proving she had carried the gun into Ada May's home with the specific intent to kill. By 11:55 p.m., Ada May Simmons Jones was pronounced dead at the scene. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, back, and a grazing wound to her head showed that this wasn't a single moment of rage. This was sustained violence, a deliberate execution, carried out by someone who wanted to make sure their victim couldn't survive. Riley had driven 4 hours to commit this murder, and she made sure it was thorough. The 3-year-old girl woke up sometime after midnight, calling for her grandmother. The elderly mother-in-law, still shaken and physically limited, had to explain why Grandma couldn't answer. That little girl became a witness to the aftermath of her mother's crime, a detail that would later help prosecutors argue for the maximum sentence. Riley hadn't just killed Ada May. She had traumatized her own daughter in ways that would last a lifetime. Riley thought she was smarter than modern technology. She believed that driving to Ohio immediately after the murder would create the perfect alibi. What she didn't understand was that her cell phone had been broadcasting her exact location to cell towers throughout the entire night, creating a digital breadcrumb trail that led investigators straight to her. By the time she reached Toledo at 2:15 a.m., detectives in Southfield already knew exactly who they were looking for and where she had gone. The phone records revealed something even more damning than Riley's location during the murder. They showed that she had been researching the route to her mother's house for days before October 5th. She had mapped the drive, calculated the timing, and even looked up the address multiple times on her GPS. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a mental health crisis. This was premeditated murder with a digital paper trail that destroyed any hope of claiming temporary insanity. What Riley did next proved that she understood exactly what she had done and knew it was wrong. Instead of staying in Ohio, where she might have been safe for days or weeks, she drove back to Detroit after only 2 hours. Investigators believe she was trying to establish a false timeline, making it look like she had been in Michigan all along rather than fleeing to another state. It was a calculated move that backfired spectacularly. By Monday afternoon, October 6th, a joint task force of Southfield detectives and Oakland County auto theft specialists had located the black Chrysler 300 in Detroit. They found Riley at a CVS pharmacy on 7 Mile Road, sitting in the passenger seat with 3 men who had nothing to do with the murder. She had backed the car into a parking spot facing the street, another sign that she was still thinking about escape routes even 24 hours after killing her mother. The arrest footage reveals something chilling about Riley's mental state. When multiple officers surrounded the vehicle with guns drawn, shouting commands for everyone to put their hands up, Riley complied without resistance. She didn't act surprised or confused. She didn't ask what was happening or claim innocence. She behaved like someone who had been expecting this moment, someone who knew exactly why the police had found her. The conversation that followed her arrest became the most talked about moment of the entire case. When officers asked for her name during the booking process, Riley looked directly at them and said, "God." Not once, but multiple times. She wasn't having a psychotic break or speaking in tongues. She was calm, deliberate, and completely aware of what she was saying. In Riley's mind, she had just exercised divine judgment against someone who deserved to die. Even more telling was what happened when detectives tried to interview her. Riley immediately asked for a lawyer, proving that she understood the legal system and knew she needed protection. Someone experiencing a genuine mental health crisis doesn't typically have the presence of mind to invoke their constitutional rights. Riley knew she was in trouble, knew she needed legal help, and knew that anything she said could be used against her. The 3 men in the car with Riley were questioned and released within hours. They had no idea they were riding with a murder suspect and had simply offered her a ride when they saw her at the CVS. Their testimony actually helped prosecutors because it showed that Riley was capable of normal social interaction less than 24 hours after committing matricide. She wasn't catatonic or visibly disturbed. She was just a killer trying to blend in. Police recovered everything they needed to build an airtight case. The surveillance footage from Ada Mae's neighborhood, the cell phone records placing Riley at the scene, the abandoned purse with her identification, and the murder weapon residue all combined to create overwhelming evidence. But they never found the actual gun, which Riley had likely disposed of somewhere along her route to Ohio. That missing weapon became the only unsolved element of an otherwise perfect investigation. The arrest brought no closure to Ada Mae's family, but it did bring certainty. There would be no long investigation, no question about who was responsible, and no possibility that Riley would claim innocence. She had left too much evidence, made too many mistakes, and revealed too much of her true nature. The woman who called herself God was about to face earthly justice. The system failed Ada Mae Simmons Jones long before Riley pulled that trigger. When Riley kidnapped her granddaughter in August 2025, every red flag in domestic violence prevention was waving frantically, but nobody was trained to see them. Mental health evaluations don't prevent murder when the person being evaluated knows exactly what to say to get released. Riley underwent her court-ordered psychological assessment and convinced professionals she wasn't dangerous, even though she had just committed kidnapping and grand theft auto. Here's what nobody talks about in custody cases like this. Grandparents who step in to raise their children's kids become sitting targets for family violence. They're not protected by the same domestic violence resources available to spouses or intimate partners. There's no legal framework for protecting grandparents from their own adult children, even when those children have demonstrated violent tendencies. Ada Mae was more vulnerable than any battered wife because she couldn't get a restraining order against her own daughter without losing access to her granddaughter. The warning signs were everywhere, painted across Riley's social media like a confession waiting to be read. Her May post about being covered in his favor was religious language indicating delusions of divine protection. Her June challenge for people to call her mother directly was a public threat disguised as defiance. Her July accusations about being failed by her family were classic victim-blaming rhetoric used by abusers to justify escalating violence. Any trained threat assessment professional could have predicted this outcome. Law enforcement knew Riley was dangerous. They had arrested her for kidnapping and vehicle theft just 2 months before the murder. They had documentation of her mental health issues and a pattern of escalating behavior toward her mother. But there's no legal mechanism for preventing someone from visiting their own parent, even when that person has a history of violence. Ada Mae couldn't protect herself without completely severing the relationship, which would have meant losing her granddaughter to foster care. The family therapy industry talks about enabling versus boundaries. But they don't talk about what happens when setting boundaries gets you killed. Ada Mae's choice not to press charges after the August incident wasn't enabling. It was a calculated decision by a woman trying to keep her family intact while protecting her granddaughter. She knew that sending Riley to prison wouldn't solve the underlying problems, and it would definitely mean losing custody of the child she was trying to protect. Mental health professionals missed the most obvious sign of Riley's deteriorating condition, her growing identification with divine authority. People who begin calling themselves God aren't experiencing depression or anxiety. They're developing dangerous delusions of omnipotence that often lead to violence against anyone they perceive as challenging their power. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a warning that Riley saw herself as judge, jury, and executioner. The custody system created the perfect storm for this tragedy. By giving Ada Mae legal guardianship, but maintaining Riley's parental rights, the court essentially set up a power struggle with the child's welfare in the middle. Riley couldn't accept shared custody because she didn't see her daughter as a person with needs. She saw her as property that had been stolen. When you combine that possessiveness with delusions of godlike authority, murder becomes inevitable. What could have saved Ada Mae's life was treating Riley's social media threats as seriously as written death threats. Every post about divine favor, every accusation against her mother, every claim of being misunderstood should have been documented as evidence of escalating risk. Social media monitoring should be standard practice in high-conflict custody cases, especially when mental health issues are involved. Words matter, and Riley's words were screaming that she was planning violence. The most tragic part of this case is how preventable it was. Ada Mae saw it coming. She knew Riley was capable of violence. She had already experienced kidnapping and theft at Riley's hands. But she was trapped by love, by responsibility to her granddaughter, and by a system that offered no protection for grandparents caught in custody battles with dangerous adult children. She died because she chose love over safety, and that choice should never have been necessary. The 3-year-old girl who survived Riley's rampage is now being raised by her step-grandfather, the only stable family member left standing after her mother destroyed everything. Child psychologists say she's too young to fully understand that her mother murdered her grandmother, but she's old enough to know that the 2 most important women in her life have both disappeared. She asks when Grandma Ada Mae is coming home and when she can see Mommy again, questions that have no good answers. This little girl will grow up knowing that her mother chose murder over shared custody. She'll learn that the woman who was supposed to protect her instead created the trauma that will follow her for life. Riley didn't just kill Ada Mae that night. She killed her daughter's sense of safety, her ability to trust, and her chance at a normal childhood. The child who was supposedly worth killing for has been abandoned by the very person who claimed to love her most. Riley Donaldson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on December 15, 2025. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read, no remorse during her sentencing hearing, and no acknowledgement that she had destroyed multiple lives. The woman who called herself God accepted earthly judgment with the same cold detachment she had shown throughout the entire case. She will die in prison, and her daughter will grow up knowing that's exactly what her mother deserves. The legal system moved swiftly because the evidence was overwhelming, but justice feels hollow when a family has been completely destroyed. Ada Mae's husband lost his wife to senseless violence. The elderly mother-in-law lost her sense of safety in her own home. The extended family lost their matriarch and their faith in the possibility of redemption. Riley's selfish act created ripple effects that will last for generations. Michigan Chief of Police Elvin Barron used this case to highlight a growing problem in domestic violence, family-on-family crime. Most domestic violence resources focus on intimate partner abuse, but parents killing children, children killing parents, and siblings killing siblings are becoming more common. Riley's case demonstrates that family violence can be just as calculated and deadly as any other form of domestic terrorism. The social media aspect of this case has sparked conversations about digital threat assessment in custody disputes. Riley's posts weren't just venting or seeking attention. They were public announcements of her deteriorating mental state and growing resentment toward her mother. Legal experts now argue that social media monitoring should be mandatory in high-conflict custody cases, especially when mental health issues are documented. What makes this case go viral isn't just the shocking nature of the crime. It's the complete reversal of everything we expect from maternal relationships. Mothers are supposed to protect their children, not murder their own mothers in front of those children. The image of Riley calling herself God while her daughter sleeps in the next room challenges every assumption about motherhood, family loyalty, and the lengths people will go to maintain control. This story resonates because it represents every grandparent's worst fear, that helping raise a grandchild could cost them their life. Ada Mae did everything right. She provided stability, love, and unlimited access to Riley. She chose mental health treatment over criminal prosecution. She kept her door open and her heart open right up until the moment Riley walked through that door with murder on her mind. The prevention message is clear. When someone starts talking like they have divine authority over life and death, believe them. When custody disputes involve kidnapping and theft, treat them as domestic violence cases. When social media posts escalate from complaints to threats, document everything and take it seriously. Ada Mae's death was preventable, but only if the people around Riley had recognized that her words were promises, not just angry outbursts. Riley Donaldson destroyed her family because she couldn't accept that being a mother means putting your child's needs before your own ego. She chose power over love, control over cooperation, and murder over compromise. Her daughter will live with those choices forever, and the rest of us are left wondering how someone who claimed to love a child could abandon her so completely in pursuit of revenge against the grandmother who actually raised her.